Welcome, friends. Theater lives on. We are the COVID-19 players. Our troubadour begins our story.
Thank you, Mary, not contrary, for giving us this book. It wasn't easy, it makes us queasy. We are in your debt. We'll share a bit right here of what you bravely wrote. But most important, come November, get out and place your vote.
These are excerpts from Mary Trump's new book, Too Much and Never Enough. Some of the characters you'll meet are Fred, Donald's father, his mother Gam, his sisters Judge Marianne and Elizabeth, and brother Rob, and of course the spirit of Mary's own father, Fred Jr., who missed the circus but knew the clown.
I'd always liked my name. As a kid in sailing camp in the 70s, everybody called me Trump. And it was a source of pride. And not because the name was associated with power and real estate, but because something about the sound suited me, a tough 6-year-old kid.
Freddie's status as the oldest in the family became an immense and stressful burden. As he got older, he became torn between the responsibility of his father had placed on him and his natural inclination to live. By the time Freddie was a teenager, he knew what his future held, and he knew what his father expected of him. He also knew that he wasn't going to measure up. For some of the Trump kids, lying was a way of life. For Fred's oldest son, lying was defensive, not simply a way to circumvent his father's disapproval or to avoid punishment, but a way to survive.
Because having a sociopath as a parent, especially if there's no one else to mitigate the effects, all but guarantees severe disruption in how children understand themselves, regulate their emotions, and engage with the world. My grandmother was ill-equipped to deal with the problems caused in her marriage by Fred's callousness, indifference, and controlling behaviors. Fred's lack of real human feeling, his rigidity as a parent and a husband, and his sexist belief in a woman's innate inferiority left her feeling unsupported.
In order to cope, Donald began to develop powerful but primitive defenses, marked by an increasing hostility to others and a seeming indifference to his ill mother's absence and father's neglect. It also made it extremely difficult for him to have any of his emotional needs met at all. In place of those needs grew a kind of grievance and behaviors which included bullying, disrespect, and aggressiveness. They served their purpose in the moment but became more problematic over time. A large minority of people still confuse his arrogance for strength, his false bravado for accomplishments, and his superficial interest in them for charisma.
Aware of the Wharton School's reputation, Donald set his sights on the University of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, even though Marianne had been doing his homework for him, she couldn't take his tests, and Donald worried that his grade point average, which put him far from the top of his class, would scuttle his efforts to get accepted. To hedge his bets, he enlisted smart kid and good test taker Joe Shapiro to take his SATs for him. That was much easier to pull off in the old days before photo IDs and computerized records. Donald, who never lacked for funds, paid his buddy well.
When Fred bragged about Donald's brilliance and claimed that his son's success had far outpaced his own, he must have known not a word of it was true. He was too smart or too good at arithmetic to think otherwise. The numbers simply didn't add up.
Donald came in with his kids and Rob's stepson. With the exception of Eric, they were all teenagers. The boys tall and chubby, wearing suits. Donald went to sit on a chair by the TV, and Ivanka climbed on his lap. The boys started wrestling. Donald watched the action from his chair, kissing Ivanka and pinching her cheek. Every once in a while, he'd stick his foot out and kick whichever boy was being pinned on the floor. Well, when they'd been younger, Donald had wrestled with them, a fight that had basically consisted of him just picking him up and throwing him on the floor. But now that they were getting older and they could fight back, well, he opted out.
I sat at the dining table with the shoe in front of me, trying to figure out what the point of it was. I had looked through the remaining boxes under the tree, thinking that perhaps the shoe's twin had been wrapped separately. But no, there was just the one, a gold lame shoe with a 4-inch heel filled with hard candy. They were both wrapped in cellophane. Where had this thing come from, I wondered? Had it been a door prize or a party favor from a luncheon? Donald came through from the kitchen. As he passed me, he asked, "What's that?" "It's a present from you." "Really?" He looked at it for a second. "Ivana!" he shouted into the foyer. She was standing on the other side of the Christmas tree near the living room. "Ivana!" "What is it, Donald?" "This is great." He pointed at the shoe and she smiled. Maybe he thought it was really gold?
Poor Donald. Guillemot. She seemed almost giddy. I thought the hospital staff might need to cut back on the meds. He was always like this. I shouldn't say it, but when he went to military academy, I was relieved. He didn't listen to anyone, especially me. And he tormented Robert. And oh, Mary, he was such a slob. He never listened to me. And your grandfather didn't care. She shook her head. Donald got away with murder.
Brad was a puppeteer, but he couldn't be seen to be pulling his son's strings. It's not that Fred was overlooking Donald's incompetence as a businessman. He knew he had more than enough talent in that area for both of them. Fred was willing to stake millions of dollars on his son because he believed he could leverage the skills Donald did have. As a savant of self-promotion, shameless liar, marketer, and builder of brands, to achieve one thing that had always eluded him, a level of fame that matched his ego and satisfied his ambition in a way money alone never could.
Then Donald said, apropos of nothing as far as I could tell, "Do you want to read my next book?"
Donald called. When you come to the office tomorrow, Ron is going to have some pages for you. I've been working on some material for that book. It's really good. He sounded excited.
Ronna handed me a manila envelope containing about 10 pages, as promised. I took it to my desk and began to read. When I finished, I wasn't sure what to think. It was clearly a transcript of a recording Donald made, which explained its stream of consciousness quality. It was an aggrieved compendium of women he expected to date, but who, having refused him, were suddenly the worst, most ugly, and most fat slobs he ever met. The biggest takeaways were that Madonna chewed gum in a way that Donald found unattractive, and that Katrina Witt, a German Olympicist who won 2 gold medals in championships, had big calves.
I was reminded of every family meal I'd ever attended during which Donald had talked about all of the women he considered ugly, fat slobs, or the men, usually more accomplished or powerful, he called losers, while my grandfather and Mary Ann, Elizabeth, and Robert all laughed and joined in. Now, that kind of casual dehumanization of people was commonplace at the Trump dinner table. What did surprise me was that he kept getting away with it.
If my grandfather's opinion had carried any weight with him, Donald would never have invested in Atlantic City. Manhattan was worth the risk as far as Fred was concerned, but in Atlantic City, he would have nothing except money and advice to offer. No political clout or knowledge of the industry to draw on. Donald had purchased Trump's castle sight unseen in 1985, only a year after he had brought Harrah's. For Donald, too much of a good thing was a better thing, he believed. So 2 casinos were better than 1.
The Taj alone needed to pull in more than $1 million a day to break even. The banks were bleeding money. As the Taj opened, Donald and his lenders were meeting to figure out how to rein in his spending. The possibility of more defaults and bankruptcies still loomed, and a solution had to be found that would protect Donald's image and, in turn, the bank's money. Without the veneer of success and confidence, the bankers feared that his properties would lose even more value. His last name was the drawer. Without the name, there would be no new gamblers or tenants or people willing to buy bonds. In addition to fronting Donald the money to cover business expenses, the banks reached an agreement with him in May 1990 to put him on a $450,000 a month allowance. That is almost $5.5 million a year for having failed miserably.
Always adept at finding an escape hatch, he seems to have come up with a plan to betray his father and steal vast sums of money from his siblings. He secretly approached 2 of my grandfather's longest-serving employees and enlisted them to draft a codicil to my grandfather's will that would put Donald in complete control of Fred's estate, including the empire and all its holdings, after he died. Mary Ann, Elizabeth, and Robert would effectively be at Donald's financial mercy, dependent on his approval for the smallest transaction. My grandfather refused to sign.
Still, my grandfather disinherited me and my brother. That is, instead of splitting what would have been my father's 20% share of his estate between me and my brother, he had it divided evenly among his 4 other children. We were included in a bequest made separately to all of the grandchildren, an amount that had proved to be less than 1/10 of 1% what my aunts and uncles had.
I have no problem calling Donald a narcissist. He meets all 9 criteria as outlined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Also, he is alleged to drink upward of 12 Diet Cokes a day and sleep very little. He has a horrible diet and does not exercise, which may contribute to or exacerbate his other possible disorders.
We talked about his reputation as a faded reality star and failed businessman would doom his run. Does anybody even believe the bullshit that he's a self-made man? What has he even accomplished on his own? I asked. Well, Mary Ann said, as dry as the Sahara. He has had 5 bankruptcies.
After the election, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, and Mitch McConnell, all of whom bear more than a passing psychological resemblance to Fred, recognized that Donald's checkered personal history and his unique personality flaws make him extremely vulnerable to manipulation by smarter, more powerful men. His pathologies have rendered him so simple-minded that it takes nothing more than repeating to him the things he said to and about himself dozens of times a day. He's the smartest, the greatest, the best, to get him to do whatever they want, whether it's imprisoning children in concentration camps, betraying allies, implementing economy-crushing tax cuts, or degrading every institution that's contributed to the United States' rise and the flourishing of liberal democracy.
For a month of sitting on a couch, scrolling through Twitter with the news constantly on in the background, I watched in real time as Donald shredded norms and endangered alliances and trod upon the vulnerable. The only thing about it that surprised me was the increasing number of people willing to enable him.
But with this out of control COVID epidemic, the possibility of an economic depression, deepening social divides along political lines, thanks to Donald's penchant for division and devastating uncertainty about our country's future, it's all created a perfect storm of catastrophe that nobody's less equipped to deal with than my uncle. Doing so would require courage, strength of character, deference to experts, and the confidence to take responsibility and to course correct after admitting mistakes.
Donald has always needed to perpetuate the fiction my grandfather started, that he is strong, smart, and otherwise extraordinary, because facing the truth that he is none of those things is too terrifying for him to contemplate. Donald, following the lead of my grandfather and with the complicity, silence, and inaction of his siblings, destroyed my father.
I can't let him destroy my country.
These are some of our losses in 2020.
Alan Merrill,
John Prine,
William Wolf Ali Yassin.
Mother Ina.
Nashum Wooden, a.k.a. Mona Foot.
George Floyd.
Larry Kramer.
Breonna Taylor.
Terrence McNally.
Oh!
Vote! Vote!
Vote.
Vote!
Vote.